was the chaplain at Baptist East Hospital in Louisville, it was a more frequent occurrence than one might think to have someone come into the emergency room having been bitten by a poisonous snake. And it was not because they were out hiking in nature somewhere and haphazardly stepped on a rattler. It was because they were participating in a religious exercise in which they handled poisonous snakes in order to prove their faith in God. After all, they would argue vehemently, Jesus says in our text for today, "Behold, I have given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the powers of the enemy, and nothing shall hurt you." And so they argued that if they were hurt, it was because of a lapse in faith. Jesus, of course, is not suggesting here that we should go out and stomp on the creatures of his kingdom. Snakes and scorpions, although they're not very fluffy or fuzzy, are just as much a part of God's animal kingdom as are puppies and bunnies. None of us would think that Jesus would suggest that we should go out and, as a religious exercise, stomp on puppies and bunnies. At least I hope not. It's clear here, folks, that Jesus is using a metaphor, because the disciples would have been well acquainted with the painful and dangerous results of treading on snakes and scorpions. It was a day-to-day affair in the part of the world that they lived in. That was just one of the hazards that you lived with. But Jesus had just said to them, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." The point was clear to the disciples with this metaphor. Jesus protects us from Satan when we are fulfilling the work he has given us to do. When we go out into the world to proclaim Jesus, we need never fear the evil one or his minions, because Jesus empowers us to do whatever he commands us to do, and the host of heaven surrounds us while we're doing it. We do have something to fear. We should fear our own arrogance and our own stupidity. Arrogance and stupidity are defined as those moments when we take our eyes off Jesus and start looking at ourselves. For instance, with regard to the snake handlers, why would one intentionally pick up a poisonous and potentially deadly reptile when you know what it can do? It was not to glorify Jesus. It was to stoke one's own ego. Look at me. Look how strong my faith is. I can handle poisonous snakes and live. See, Jesus knows us. That's why he so quickly adds the corrective in our text. "Nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven." In other words, he's telling us, focus on the message that you have been given to deliver, not on yourselves, not on anything about you. We rejoice in what Jesus has done for us, and our goal is to tell everyone who will listen what he has done for us and what he has done for them. But while we try to pursue that goal, there are times when the devil will try to stop us. He interferes with our showing the love of God to people, and he interferes with snakes and scorpions, the snakes of our own self-interest, the scorpions of our pride and our arrogance. I once knew a pastor who threw his son out of the house because he was an alcoholic. How does that improve his son's chances of coming to know Jesus' love for him? We've all heard stories of people who have used their time with children for inappropriate relationships, with kids in their care. How does that lead a child to the cross of Christ? People on the streets all the time, I hear it. They look at homeless people who are asking for money and say nasty things to them. Things like, "Get a job." How does that show the love of Christ? People judge others for choices they're making in their lives that, granted, are not consistent with God's law. But is it your place to judge others? Is that not the place only for God? Snakes and scorpions. Snakes and scorpions writhing all around our legs, biting us and stinging us, and trying to distract us from loving others like Christ loved us, unconditionally. You and I, we are Christ's emissaries in this world. It is our job, all the time, wherever we are, whatever we're doing. And if we focus on ourselves instead of what Christ has done, we are failing in our mission. We are getting down in the dirt and wallowing around with the snakes and the scorpions and letting them bite us and sting us. It's not an easy task to which we've been called, granted. And of course, every single one of us here has failed from time to time. But one failure does not a life make. Neither two, nor three, nor 70 times 7. That's why we have forgiveness. That's why we have the Word and the Holy Sacrament to empower us to move forward and to try again. And again, and yet again. Someone said to me recently, I've invited that guy to church a dozen times and he never shows up. I said, invite him again. See, we've been called by Christ to be those beautiful feet who preach the good news that we talk about in our gradual for today. Those people who publish peace and bring the good news of salvation over and over again. We are washed in the waters of baptism. We are fed with the very body and blood of Christ. God empowers us to rise above the snakes and the scorpions, to overcome our arrogance and our self-righteousness, and to do the work as the disciples of God. So yeah, we really are able to tread on snakes and scorpions when we keep our eyes on Jesus, because the heavenly host protects us as we do God's will.